Taylor has been called the voice of the grunts. He's a former soldier who covers war from the point of view of the troops, and that's made him a thorn in the side of the military's top brass for decades. Taylor grew up loving the military, spent 4 years as a private before launching a magazine called Esprit de Corps. Now, that was back in 1989. At first, it was just something for soldiers to read on Canadian military planes. It was funded by the Defense Department, and Taylor figured it was a way for him to travel and stay close to the action. He reported from wherever Canadians were stationed, and soldiers started telling him stories that didn't really match the official military lines. Taylor told those stories, and he felt the heat. Within a couple of years, Esprit de Corps split from the Defense Department and ended up on newsstands as an independent with a new motto: plain talk and bad manners. Through the 90s, Taylor exposed corruption and hazing in the military and came to prominence with tough, uncompromising coverage of the Somalia scandal.
The lack of leadership and logistic support which these troops received, it wasn't at the private level that the problems happened in Somalia.
Since then, Taylor has made 21 trips to Iraq. He's covered conflicts around the world, including the Balkans and Afghanistan.
It's been dubbed Mission Impossible by the people that are planning it.
And he's written 5 bestsellers. In 2004, he made headlines when he was kidnapped by Mujahideen in northern Iraq.
This is right where the actual abduction took place. The Hitachi sign, that's where it is, that's where it took place.
He was tortured for 5 days and narrowly escaped death by beheading.
Originally, they thought I was a spy. I mean, it was at least over the 5-day period 6 times when I was taken to be executed. I mean, I was on the cusp.
He tells the story in his new memoir called Unembedded. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Scott Taylor. Good to see you. Welcome to the show. Good to be here.
I wanted them to keep running the part about the mustache because I wanted to explain to you why I've got this beard. Right now, this is not how I usually look, and I also wanted to, I mean, it's a pretty good intro video. It's not often you get to play that, so anyway. I'm heading back into Afghanistan in a couple of weeks. And when we go into Afghanistan, myself and my team try to mitigate the risk by looking as much like the Afghan locals. We dress like locals. We travel around in local taxis, so this is part of the deception. It doesn't fool them completely. As our Australian friend says, from about 200 meters we stick out like dog's balls. But part of the students that are here. Yeah, I wasn't expecting so many students here today. I thought, of course, everybody's sitting here cheering back and forth, and this is supposed to be a remembrance-themed talk that they've asked me to give, which I should say I'm quite honored to have been asked to come here. This club is more than 100 years old, very prestigious. And the fact that I'm able to be here among those former previous speakers that have been here is quite an honor. So thank you very much for that. I also know that my sister and my wife are in the audience, so I know it's a tough crowd. So if any students want to help me out on that, that'll be good. And as I said, I was asked to speak on remembrance. I'm going to touch on remembrance and then go into a couple of other issues and hopefully come back to remembrance. I'm also going to show you a short movie clip as well, so we'll have a multimedia presentation today. One of the things that happened this year before Remembrance Day in Ottawa was a small institute, and the guy happens to be a friend of mine, the director. He's a bit of what you'd call a bear baiter when it comes to the defense institution and the defense establishment. And Steve Staples thought that he should try to do something different to get people thinking about Remembrance Day. So he went out and in his own pocket and his group printed and produced about 2,500 little white poppies, these pins, which they stood around the War Memorial in Ottawa. 6 volunteers, some students from the university, handing these things out. Now, of course, he alerted the media, told them he was doing this. Sun News took the bait. They're not here today, are they? They roared down there to film this minor effrontery that someone was handing out white poppies. And the theme for them was that they wanted to remember in peace. They wanted it to be a memory of peace, not of war. And for some reason, the Sun News took this to mean that they didn't want to honor the sacrifice of our soldiers. Somehow they didn't want to honor the courage. All they wanted to remember was the peace. And they went on this thing for days. The little amount of money that he spent on those couple of hundred pins that he handed out got him, I think, about 5 days of solid print and broadcast coverage, courtesy of Sun News, who were outraged. And of course they called up politicians who immediately wanted to defend the veterans because they believed this was the case as well. And they came to us and they thought I would jump on this and say, yes, this is an outrage, this should never be done. And I got to thinking about this and I'm thinking, wait a minute, if they want to remember for peace, you have to realize that every soldier, every citizen soldier that set off to fight in the world wars and since, is setting out to fight for that objective. Nobody sets out, unless they're a psychopath, to fight for the perpetration of war. Nobody wants to kill for the sake of killing. When they go off, ultimately what they want to achieve is peace. When our soldiers went off in World War I and experienced the hells that they did, they came back. They wanted to believe that they had fought in the war to end all wars. That's what they called it. They did not want to see their sons or anybody else have to go off and do what they had done. They wanted peace. Less than a generation later, they were called upon again to go back out. And when our soldiers went and fought World War II, the objective was to free the occupied territories, defeat the Germans, and come home and establish peace. And they did. And when they came back, the motto of those soldiers who were injured, the war amps, is never again. They didn't want to perpetuate war. Yes, they may have been honorable, they may have shown courage in doing what they did, but they wanted to achieve peace. So for me, for Steve Staples to put that out there, to get people thinking, particularly young people, that was his goal. People just put on a poppy, they don't necessarily think about it, they know they're supposed to wear them for 2 weeks around November 11th, and that's it. But if they have to think of what is it we're wearing, why are we doing it, he achieved his goal. And it also illustrated to me again that this is the thing we always talk about, that the truth is the first casualty in war. And that's people hijack these agendas. These politicians jumped up and wanted to defend the veterans. Now it suggests that most veterans wouldn't really care if someone wanted to remember for peace. But people talk about propaganda and people who hijack these agendas. And one of the groups that's probably the most honest about deliberately dehumanizing people is the military. And I say this as one who went through both boot camp and then battle school and took my commando training. And what they realized, the instructors, is that the hardest thing for a person to do is to take another life. We have empathy as human beings. As an animal, that's very unique. I think only elephants and dolphins have the same capacity. And they don't kill each other in genocidal proportions. We have to overcome that instinct to feel each other's pain. So to do that, we demonize the enemy as soldiers. We're not fighting human beings. In World War I, we were fighting the Hun, and we were fighting Jerry, we were fighting Krauts, we were fighting Japs, we were fighting Nips. When it came to Korea, there were slopes, and there was gooks in Vietnam. And I'm saying these words that are offensive because they're racial epithets that shouldn't be used. But our soldiers used them, they needed to do it, to demonize the people they were about to kill. And it carries on. I mean, even in modern times, for the American soldiers in Iraq, at a period I was covering Iraq quite extensively, and probably before most of your time, but in 2003, when the Americans first took apart Saddam Hussein's regime, they didn't replace it with any authority. And looting took place in the streets. I mean, widespread looting. It was like from a Mad Max movie. People were going crazy, armed mobs, stealing everything that they could. And the Americans didn't intervene. Finally, it got to the point where they had to. And the Americans, having a limited understanding of the culture from Iraq, very limited, had seen that there was a major statue in downtown Baghdad to Ali Baba. That is where Baghdad was where the myth took place, and that's where they honored this. So for the Americans, they put two and two together. They had no understanding of Arabic, but they knew Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves story. So when they would arrive on the scenes where crimes were taking place, they would demand to know from the Iraqis, are you Ali Baba? Are you Ali Baba? And in the American soldier's mind, the Ali Baba was a thief. To the Iraqis, who much better understand their own myth, Ali Baba was the one who killed the thieves. He actually drowned them in oil in the jugs, and he tricked them. So every Iraqi gleefully said, yes, I'm an Ali Baba, thinking that meant I'm a hero. And the Americans promptly arrested them, which made there was a huge cultural divide of why Americans kept arresting all the good guys. Our soldiers are no different in Afghanistan. I don't know if it's still the same, but for quite some time during the combat, they referred to all Afghans as Hajis. If they had to go out, they were fighting the Hajis. And this term came about, again, through misunderstanding. Every time our soldiers would go on patrol into a village, naturally they would go off and get their head man or the elder, the most prominent man in the village, and bring him to meet whoever the patrol leader was. Invariably, he would introduce himself as Haji, whatever, Ahmed, Walid, or Achikazai, whatever his name happened to be. But every time he started off with the first name, seemed to be Haji. So our guys wondered how it could be that in a country of 28 million, everybody's named Haji. Well, Haji is actually a term of respect given to someone who's been on a pilgrimage to Mecca. They've been on the Hajj. So this is something which in those societies, very poor societies, very few people have been. These are very prominent men. Almost like, I can't equate it to getting a knighthood, but it's like the term or the title in front of their name meant something. Our soldiers thought it was a derogatory term, so they were using it as such. But again, this was to allow our soldiers to do the job that they had to do, so that in their minds, when they looked through a sight, the gun sight, the guy on the other side of that was not a human being, but he was a bad guy, or a derogatory term that they used. Now, having military dehumanize individuals to get their job done is one thing, When governments and societies do it in order so they can perpetrate a war or perpetuate a war, is something else. And my first experience with this on a big scale was the first Gulf War back in the 90s. And I was a journalist at that point, but I just come out of the military, still wanted to believe everything our governments were telling us. And I can recall when Saddam Hussein in August of 1990 invaded Kuwait, people didn't really care. I mean, there was a bit of an outrage at the beginning, but here it was. We had already demonized the oil-rich countries of the Middle East since the oil crisis in the 70s. They were all fat cats. They were all holding us over a barrel. Who cared if one oil sheik country invaded another? Who really cared as long as the oil flowed? That was basically the perception of the states. To change that attitude and to get people put on a war footing, they had a congressional hearing, and a young Kuwaiti girl came in and talked about the invasion to the congressman. And she described in detail how these Iraqi soldiers had come in, taken babies, newborn babies, out of incubators and thrown them on a floor to die. And that's pretty horrific stuff. And people heard that and thought, my God, what could be more inhumane for a people? How can these Iraqis do that, do such a thing? We have to go fight them. And this isn't something new. I mean, you go back to the Boer War at the turn of the century. We had young guys from Saskatchewan went off to fight the Boers because they heard that Boers, they didn't know what they were, but they're in South Africa, and they were bayoneting British babies. Well, that's something you can fight for. Obviously, those guys need to be taught a lesson. Germany invaded Belgium in 1914. A lot of people still thought it was just a colonial war, the First World War. Why should we fight for our empire against their empire? Then came the stories about how Germans were bayoneting Belgian babies. Well, I mean, my God, we got to go fight the Hun. We've got to go out there and we can rally behind that. I too got caught up in that. And I was there covering the first Gulf War. And we were told it was going to be a set piece battle. This was going to be the real Third World War. America was going up against the fourth largest army in the world. Saddam Hussein himself told us, he promised us it was going to be the mother of all battles. And we were ready for that. And in the end, it was one of the biggest cakewalks. It was one of the most one-sided victories in history. Our technology just simply destroyed them. And unlike a lot of the people that turned around and came back at the end of that war, I went forward with our engineers, the ones who went into Kuwait. I went up on that death highway and covered the desert and saw the tens of thousands. It was over 200,000 Iraqis had been slaughtered out there in the desert. They had no chance. I saw the weaponry that they had, and I realized between their tactics, their defensive positions, they didn't stand a chance. We slaughtered them, and it was an unsettling feeling. And I can recall one U.S. senator said that it was, when he witnessed the same sight, he said it was like the world's greatest superpower had gone to war with the Flintstones. Well, it's a funny quip unless you're actually out there looking at those guys, and they're not Flintstones. They're dead Iraqis who were brothers and sons and fathers. And we used the excuse and we trumped it up. And it turned out, lo and behold, Hale & Knowlton, I believe, was the company that had staged the Iraqi girl, or the Kuwaiti girl, to talk about the incubators. That never happened. There was no dead babies. There was no incubators. The whole thing was a hoax. As it had been, Boers didn't bayonet babies, and neither did the Germans. But we're still, in this modern age, getting caught up in it and being forced to dehumanize people as we did to achieve our goals. Now, as you probably saw briefly in the intro, I did spend time as a hostage. Very few people have spent time with Islamic extremists. I spent 5 days with them. I got to see how that works in reverse. We aren't the only ones who dehumanize. They do the same thing. And where it's in Afghanistan, where they're illiterate, where they're impoverished, they have no idea who we are, it's very easy for their clerics to describe to them just kind of what sex-mad perverts we are in the West and what we want to do to their people, and easy for them to believe that they have to kill themselves to defend themselves against us because they've never met us. And I want to just show you a small clip at this point, if we can. What I'll do is explain, this is a movie that was made about my captivity. There's an actor playing me, and the Turkish girl was captured with me. We'd been taken in the small town of Talafar in the north. It's a very remote part of Iraq, and it's a Turkmen enclave, which again, I won't get into the details of that, but they were being held at this point by Al-Qaeda. We didn't know that. We got in, we got taken, we were accused of being spies. We were held. I was about to be executed at one point. They took us, they beat us, and then the Americans attacked them. So we were in this town when the Americans attacked. They killed a great number of them all around us. There was wounded, there was dead. We were on the receiving end of American Apache helicopter attacks. We felt we were going to be killed by the Americans. And then when the dust settled, those who were left needed to move us. And in fact, at one point, they were going to shoot me because they had no more room in the car. But they didn't. He just got taken back. But you can imagine the anger they had now. All these guys that were there, they'd lost friends, they'd lost brothers in the fighting, and now I look like one and I'm among them. So now they're moving us. I'll just show you this clip and then we'll come back to it. If we can just take 2 minutes to watch this. That guy in the jacket's supposed to be me.
It was a house under construction, but pretty much off on its own. And then Mubashir left. We didn't know where he was going, so he had to find what to do with us. I mean, he couldn't do it from the house. And it wasn't long after that another car drove out. Four gunmen got out.
I was so much afraid. Again, I was with a group that I didn't know.
The leader of this group, when he saw me, I knew it was hatred in his eyes. He saw me as an American, and then that into the symbol of the occupation. He began to sort of shout directions, and our guards from Telefar quickly took their cue from him, and separated Zainab immediately.
I was sure that he had killed many people before.
He's digging a grave.
And he did it with a big happiness.
They took us at gunpoint out the building, and he showed us where there was a freshly dug grave. And he told us, at sunset,
I'm going to behead you. I will use this blade.
I don't think there was a greater fear of anybody that was working as a journalist in Iraq at that time. That of being caught by the insurgency and beheaded. I'm faced with something that goes beyond a bullet. It's going to be excruciating pain. This is something that slowly saw your neck in half.
Okay. So, the reason I showed you that clip is this guy, I wanted to get you guys a visual of just how much hatred this guy had, and that actor gave a pretty good rendition of that. Now, that individual, he actually did take us out when sunset came. It was myself and it was a male prisoner that were taken out, not Zainab. We were let out to be beheaded. And I've got to tell you, at that moment, walking out there was the hardest thing I've ever done. When you know you're about to be beheaded and you're going to be kneeling down and he's going to cut your head off in front of that grave. Just to tell your legs to move forward and your brain is just screaming with all kinds of emotions. Anyway, we got to the edge, and the guy who at the beginning there had left. He was actually our captor. He was in charge of us. He came back. Literally, I mean, as the sun is setting and this guy's got us within feet of the grave, the guy returned and told him we were not his prisoners to kill. He called off the execution. And our hearts were just racing. I mean, you have to come back from that mental place where you're steeling yourself to go through this. And I have to also confess, I don't know if I even told my wife this, but I'd asked to go first if they're going to cut the two of our heads off, because I knew I couldn't have taken it if I'd watched the other guy. He was a guy, an Iraqi from Mosul. I couldn't have taken it if I'd watched him. So I actually volunteered to go first. And it sounds heroic, take me first. But because I knew I couldn't witness it and then still get through it. Anyway, this guy was pretty miffed that he didn't get to kill me, and he was still in charge of our guard detail. So that night, we were still taken out in the desert, and he was sitting down on his haunches. He was on guard. I was put on one of these little cots where I was laying down, and there's others who were around, but I remember moving at night because once it cooled off, I tried to turn my back to the wind. I didn't have any blankets. We were just laying on this literally wire cot outside under the sun or stars. And he got up, and he came and he stood over me. I could sense him there, and I had no idea what he was going to do. And he stood there for quite some time. I was pretending I was asleep, and then he moved off, and he was gone, so I was relieved. Then I heard him come back, and he stood there, and I could feel this strange sensation. I didn't know what he was doing. And then I realized he'd put a blanket on me. He'd come over, he realized I was cold, and his humanity had returned, and we had reestablished that. He was back to being who he was. These people, I mean, they were trained to hate us. They had never experienced us. And it works two ways. I mean, that whole familiarity can breed contempt, but it's also ignorance breeds fear. And his fear of me was what caused him to hate me. And once he knew that I was just a, husband and a father, and he saw that and he was told that, he reverted to his own humanity. So I wanted to show you that. One of the things we also get caught up in as a society is self-deception. And I'll say this, it was a few nights ago, my wife and I were at the Marine Corps Ball in Ottawa. Now, the Marine Corps celebrates their birthday every year. It's around Remembrance Day. It's a big event, it's a huge event in Washington, and wherever they're posted, the Marine escorts from the embassies organize a big ball, and then they play on a big screen a message, a video message from their commandant, the U.S. Marine Corps commandant. So we're watching this video presentation, and it's completely, G.I. Joe, all kinds of good old banter back and forth. And the final message he had for the Marines was they should remember they've never lost a battle, they've never lost a war. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, actually, if we go Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, you guys are 0 for 3 in the last 3. But they want to believe that, and every Marine in the room gave his old Semper Fi, Semper Fi. And it was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. You guys can't claim victory in either Vietnam, Iraq, or Afghanistan. And we've got to make sure as a society we don't do the same thing. Canada's in the process of losing a war right now. We're about to end our contribution to Afghanistan. We've been there for 12 years. We've lost 158 soldiers killed. We've had more than 2,000 physically wounded. And we've lost the war. It wasn't our war to fight. It wasn't our war to win. But the fact is we sent soldiers to serve, and they did. And Canada has never experienced a military defeat before. You can check the record. Unlike the Marine Corps guy, I'm telling you the truth. Up until now, we have not. We fought to a draw in Korea, but the rest were victories. So this is something new for us. And I think we need to do a bit of soul searching on this, because we sent those soldiers to serve. Even if it's a defeat, we have to care for them when they come back. And there's all kinds of issues. Our guys coming back with PTSD, far more so than a lot of guys from World War II and World War I. And it's more difficult for them to deal with it because there's far fewer of them. When our soldiers went off in World War I and World War II, when they returned, everything had changed. They came back, women were in the workforce. Society as we knew it had disappeared. So that whatever they went through over in Europe or in the Pacific, when they came back, it meant something. Everything was different. Everybody started from scratch. Our guys have gone on multiple tours in Afghanistan. And when they come back, I mean, I'm telling you, it's a whole different world over there. They see their friends bleed out and die in front of them. They've lost limbs. They've seen all kinds of things. And when they come back, Mayor Ford is still bonkers. He's still catching the news. It's like, this is crazy. What does this mean? Like when you've seen life and death, real life and death situations, then you see this guy smoke crack and he's being a buffoon at a football game. How does that impact upon them? The world here didn't change. It's the same. That's why it's not easy to compare World War II vets to guys coming back from Afghanistan. And one of the things that we missed in Afghanistan, before I close out, is we missed an opportunity because we weren't educated. There's a lot of students here in this room, and I'm going to say this, I mean, education is very, very key. The ignorance breeds fear. And things we didn't know. I mean, culturally, I didn't study the Quran until I was a captive. I converted to Islam at gunpoint. My Muslim name is Zamir, which means leader. I practice Islam like I practice Christianity. I don't, but I was forced to convert. And one of the things I learned was that if a warrior breaks bread with you, he cannot take your life. You form a pact. So those nights when we were out there, myself and Zainab, if they fed us, and they would always feed us first, no matter what the circumstance, we ate first, then they took the food to themselves. But when they came and sat with us, it wasn't because they were hungry. It's because at that moment they decided they weren't going to kill us, that group. And then we get moved to a different group, and then things changed all the time, back and forth. But knowing that, and knowing that we went into Afghanistan, knowing the code of conduct, the Pashtun Valley, the honor code of the Pashtuns in the south, they'll have nothing. These people are poor, dirt poor. But if our soldiers would go to a village, they would find whatever cakes they could and offer them tea and cakes. And our soldiers refused because they were told by the medical personnel that you could get a stomach infection, so don't take any local food. And that's the same as if I offer you my hand as a handshake and you refuse to take it. That means the fight's still on. So we missed a lot of opportunity by not, we may have had a few cases of diarrhea, but we would have made a lot more inroads to the people than we did. Simple things. And knowing that there'll be one more warrior, one more citizen warrior that's not going to take up a gun against you because he's made a pact with you. So breaking bread is the same as building bridges. We need to build more bridges than we need to build walls. I'm going to say that the best defense against propaganda is education and dialogue. And I guess to say that the start of the conflict, the death of truth may be quick and painless, but the subsequent human suffering endures forever. And that is something we should always remember. Thank you.